I do know one thing though. Casey told me off the record. He said when he trained for the 71 America, which he won in spectacular fashion, like I said, 19 years of age, youngest Mr. America. He said to me that Jones was training him for that contest using high intensity, 1 to 2 sets per exercise. You know how the system goes. You know, they called it the Nautilus system, whatever, or high intensity exercise system. Casey told me he was sneaking off in the middle of the night to a gym that he had a key to a gym, and he was still doing 25 sets of body art. He says nobody ever knew about it. He says Jones probably would have shot me if he knew that. But
hello and welcome. I am Coach Castle, a certified biomechanics expert, nutritionalist, and efficiency coach. Subscribe to this channel to learn the most efficient ways to maximize your muscle growth and recovery, enhance your body, and advance your mind, all using the latest science. Welcome to Castle's Corner.
So, I mean, would you mind, just because I know you know Mike Mentzer personally, would you mind digging into who he was a little bit, giving us a little backstory on him?
Okay. Well, I met Mike Mentzer. He was living back east, I believe, around the Baltimore area. He was originally from Pennsylvania, a small town in Pennsylvania. Mike we had a couple of things in common. We both started weight training at the same age, which was 12. He also started 12. And coincidentally, our original bodybuilding idol was the same person, Bill Pearl. Bill Pearl was a 4-time winner of the Mr. Universe. He won the Mr. America in 1953. And as we sit here today, at 91 years of age, Bill Pearl is the oldest living Mr. America. But he was both Mike and I idolized him as young guys, you know. He was from a town called Ephrata, Pennsylvania. And of course, his brother Ray got involved in weight training also. And I met him when he came out to California. I believe, I'm not 100% sure. I think it was right after he won the IFBB Mr. America, which was around 1976 or so. It might have been even earlier, but it was in the late 70s. That's when I met him. And we became friends immediately. I found him to be an extremely intelligent guy. And how Mike got involved in high intensity is an interesting story, because what happened was he was using conventional training. At that time, we're talking about, let's say 1969, 70, around that time. He was doing, your conventional high volume, 20, 25 sets per body part. And he did pretty well. I mean, he won a couple of teenage contests. So he wound up, decided to enter the Mr. America contest. This was the AAU Mr. America, and the year was 1971. The winner of that contest happened to was the youngest ever Mr. America. That was Casey Viator, who was another proponent, already had been a proponent of the high intensity system. And Mike got to talking to Casey. Mike placed 10th in that contest, by the way, which isn't bad for a guy who was 19 years old. He was, I think he was about maybe same age as Casey, around 19. And he got to talking to Casey. And then Mike, I believe, got in contact with a fellow from Massachusetts named Dave Masterakis, who was another competitor on the East Coast, a very successful bodybuilding competitor, also into high intensity. And basically, see, Mike was that's what he described, very analytical. I mean, he kind of like took things apart and used common sense to come to a certain deduction. And, and what happened was Casey, I believe, I don't know whether it was Mike himself or Casey, got in touch with this man named Arthur Jones. Now, Arthur Jones is the guy who turned Casey on to high intensity training. Arthur Jones was an eccentric type of person. He's had many businesses through his life. He was a movie producer. He rescued animals in Africa. He was a mercenary in Africa. Very strange guy, but self-educated, very, very smart guy. What happened with his origin of high intensity, Arthur Jones was an amateur bodybuilder, let's say in the 50s, just not trying to compete, just enjoyed lifting weights. And he was doing the same thing. He was training, 5-6 days a week. But because he got very busy with his movies or whatever he had to do, he had to reduce his workouts to 3 times a week, whole body workouts. Arthur Jones expected to lose muscle because he had reduced the frequency and the volume, not just the number of days he trained, but he went from doing, let's say, 15 to 20 sets of muscle down to, he only had time to do 2 to 3 sets per muscle. But he said to himself, being a kind of very rational person, Jones, although eccentric, as I say, he decided, if I'm only going to do 3 sets, I'm going to go all out. I'm going to do it until I can't lift the weights. This is where the training to failure principle. Now, he didn't invent it. It had been mentioned, several times, but nobody ever went into depth about training.
Was it Steve Rogers, or who was the gentleman, the first guy who came up with it, who actually taught him or made him the Nautilus machines maybe or something? I'm trying to remember.
No, well, actually, Jones' son is the one who invented the Nautilus cam. I can't remember his first name. Jones' son was a young man who happened to be a math genius and a physics genius. I don't know where he got the idea, but he got the idea to invent this particular cam, a shape. It was the shape, of a Nautilus shell. And the way it was designed, in other words, Jones felt that, in a free weight exercise, you as a certain point where you lose resistance completely. For example, the barbell curl, you have resistance when you start, middle. When you get to the top, the resistance is just about gone. Jones reasoned that if you could design a machine that applied resistance throughout the full range of motion from top to bottom, it would work the muscle more completely. And if the exercise was done to failure, you can get away with a lot less exercise. You'd get better results with less time. That was the concept of the high intensity training. Jones frequently said the only reason he came up with he called his Nautilus machines a kind of high-tech barbell. In other words, it gave you the same kind of resistance, but because it worked resistance through a full range of motion, it kind of like overcame, let's say, a lot of the weaknesses of free weights and allowed you to work a muscle more completely. Anyway, Mike Mentzer, through Casey Vader, met Arthur Jones. Arthur Jones explained all these concepts to Mike, and Mike decided to give it a try. He looked at Casey, and he was very, very impressed with Casey. Anyone could go online and look up Casey Vieta. You'll see what this guy looked like. At 19, he was a phenomenon. In fact, he won the Mr. America in 71, and most of the body parts. He used to give a body part awards: most muscular, best arms, best chest. The year before, at 18, he competed out here. That's when I first met Casey. In 1970, he competed at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Culver City. I forget how much, I don't know what he placed in the overall, but he won almost every muscle group. He won all the body parts except for abdominals at 18 years of age in the Mr. America. That went to a guy named Chuck Amato from Portland, Oregon. But in other words, Mike Mentzer was so impressed by Casey, he said to himself, if Casey could get these results from high intensity training, I'm going to give it a shot. And the whole concept, as Mike explained to me, made sense to him. In his writings, if you've ever read Mike's writings, he would point out, he would compare it to, he'd use 2 comparisons. He'd talk about hitting a nail in a piece of wood. If you hit the nail in a piece of wood, the nail goes in, but if you keep hitting it, once the nail's in, you start to break the wood apart. Meaning that when you train, you could work a muscle up to a point. If you go past that point, meaning excessive volume, excessive frequency, the muscle either doesn't respond or goes backwards. That was, and he also used another analogy of lying in the sun, where if you lie in the sun for a certain period of time, you'll get a suntan, right? If you go too long, you start to burn and cause damage to your skin. You could actually cause mutation in the DNA, possibly get even skin cancer. So his point being, exercise was good up to a point. In fact, there's a word for this. I don't know if Mike used it very often, but there's a word in science called hormesis. Hormesis refers to either it could be a supplement, it could be a exercise or a workout style, where it's very beneficial up to a point. But if you exceed that point, it's like a U-shaped curve. It starts to go backwards, where you lose the benefit. For example, even certain food supplements. I mean, you could take them and get benefit, but if you take too much, now you're kind of overdosing and you get some illnesses from it. So Mike's the concept there, and like I said, Mike, he started the training at Gold's Gym, and of course Ray Mentzer, his brother, was also into the same type of high intensity training. And that's what they did. Sometimes Casey Vieta would come out and work out with him, and they did all high intensity training. And many years later, a young guy in England named Dorian Yates started reading Mike's articles. And just like Mike was impressed by Arthur Jones' material, Dorian Yates looked at Mike Mentzer and said, "This guy's got a great physique. I like his physique. And his training principles, meaning high intensity, make sense to me. I'm going to train that way." Dorian Yates went on to win 6 Mr. Olympia titles, training entirely the whole time high intensity. I witnessed him train, so I can tell you he really did.
Like a lunatic. I mean, we've all seen the blood and guts videos, and I mean,
yeah.
Mike did mention the hormesis in his book Heavy Duty.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Times, yeah. And
Okay.
he would also reference calluses and digging a hole.
Yeah, that's another one. The
He's
callus.
very good with the metaphors. Very excellent with explaining things like that.
Right.
At what point in time was the Colorado experiment? Was that right into the heavy duty when he first started doing the high intensity training?
You're talking about Mike Mentzer or Casey?
Mike.
Mike wasn't involved in the Colorado experiment. That was Casey Vieta.
But what point in time was that? Was that before he met Mike? After he met Mike?
That was after. That was
after he met Mike. Okay.
Yeah, that was after. Yeah, that was after.
Because that was pretty interesting. I mean, a lot of it's kind of understood what happened nowadays, but it's still really interesting.
Well, that particular experiment, Arthur Jones contacted some physiologists, I believe the University of Colorado, something like that, and he brought out Casey Vieta. Casey had been involved in an industrial accident where he actually had his finger cut off, and he hadn't trained in something like I forget whether it's 6 months or 9 months. And he, of course, no matter who you are, when you don't work out at all, the muscles atrophy. It's use it or lose it.
Mhm.
So Casey showed up at this experiment weighing something like 160 pounds. He still looked pretty. I mean, if you look at him, if you look at the before and after pictures, he still had a better physique than the average guy in the street, because that was Casey. That was his
great genetics. Yeah, great genetics.
Fantastic genetics. And Jones' idea was to see just how much muscle Casey could put back on his body. I don't remember. Do you remember the exact length? I don't know whether it was 30 days or 60 days.
That's the thing, is it was 30 days and it was 60 pounds.
That's okay. He put on 60 pounds in 30 days.
But I'm sure he was off the drugs. It was all muscle memory. I mean, this, that, and the other. But it's still. I thought it was a promotion for the Nautilus machines. Look how good they are.
Right. Well, it's that as you point out accurately, that experiment has been criticized tremendously because, first of all, you use Casey, who was a genetic freak to begin with, and as you point out, the muscle memory situation, meaning that once you've developed a certain amount of muscle, you can gain it back. It becomes a little bit harder when you get over age 60, but Casey was still young. All he had to do was work out and the muscle would come right back. And Jones, I communicated with Jones over the phone for a couple of years. I used to talk to him. I used to call, he was in Florida, and I used to call him up, and I mentioned, I said, Mr. Jones, some people say that Casey used steroids to gain his muscle, and he'd get angry. He'd get actually angry, not at me, but at the concept, that Casey was sneaking steroids, and that's what really helped him gain the size. He swears that Casey was constantly monitored. There's no way he could have snuck steroids. That was his answer. Whether it's true or not, I couldn't tell you, but that's what Jones told me.
I mean, guys will always find a way to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right. I do know one thing, though. Casey told me off the record, he said when he trained for the 71 America, which he won in spectacular fashion, like I said, 19 years of age, youngest Mr. America, he said to me that Jones was training him for that contest using high intensity, 1 to 2 sets per exercise. You know how the system goes. They called it the Nautilus system, whatever, or high intensity exercise system. Casey told me he was sneaking off in the middle of the night to a gym, that he had a key to a gym, and he was still doing 25 sets of bodyguard. He says nobody ever knew about it. He says Jones probably would have shot me if he knew that, but he told me that off the record.
I used to do dumb shit like that. I would do a full workout for like an hour and a half. This is back before I knew how to train. Do a workout for an hour and a half, and I'd leave. I'd go home. Like, did I do enough? I don't think I did enough. I'd go back and I'd redo the entire goddamn thing.
I did similar stupid stuff myself. It's a concept See, this is the mistaken concept a lot of people have. More is better. They think the longer they spend in the gym, the more sets they don't understand about this hormesis situation. Once you go past a certain point, you either don't gain or you lose what you built. There was a very famous bodybuilder who won, the only man to win the Mr. America twice. His name was John C. Gribbing. He won the Mr. America in 1940 and 1941. In fact, after he won in 41, they passed a new rule that you can't win the Mr. America more than once, because they thought he'd keep winning it year after year. He was that much better than the other guys. But he made a statement. He used to always say that when he worked out, in a way, he kind of used high intensity himself without realizing it, because what he said was when he worked out, he would stop training a muscle as soon as the muscle was, he used the word congested or pumped.
I heard that. I think if it was him, but I read that somewhere. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. In other words, as soon as let's say he was working his bicep, as soon as he felt a big pump in the bicep, stop. Whether it's 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets, whatever, he wouldn't do any more. And his reasoning was from his experience, and this man worked out many, many years. I mean, his experience was if he went past the pump, he wouldn't make any progress. That was his personal experience. So he'd always stop as soon as he got a pump.